The quote goes, "How happy is the blameless vessel's lot, the world forgetting by the world forgot. Eternal sunshine of a spotless mind, each prayer accepted and each wish resigned."
Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind takes place on Valentine's Day 2004, which was pretty much exactly 20 years ago. I know, right? It's funny how time passes. One minute you're a kid, hiding under a table from the strangers in your parents' kitchen, or playing outside in the garden with your friends. Then, in a flash, it's 20 years later, 2024. You're an adult, at least that's what your date of birth would suggest, trying to find your way in a world that sometimes feels like it's changing right in front of you. You get a job, an apartment, a car. Some days are good, some not so much. And if you're lucky, you meet someone electric, someone who fills your world with eternal sunshine, someone nice.
Seem nice, so.
God, don't you know any other adjectives? You're really nice.
Oh.
God, I have to stop saying that.
And sometimes that someone may not be your happily ever after. People grow and change. Time passes and the electricity fades until it feels like the world is collapsing around you, like the tide is coming in and washing everything away. And in those moments, you might want nothing more than to leave it all behind, to forget it. And we do that in our own way. We throw out their things and avoid places that remind us of them. We ask our friends not to mention them. We delete old photos. We block them on social media. We ghost them, leaving them on red. But none of us have spotless minds. Try as we might to selectively edit our memories to forget someone, it's harder to forget how they made us feel. Because memories are not just defined by the clothes we wore or the words that we said. Memories are defined by the things that we felt, and good or bad, they become part of who we are. Which is why Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind is just as relevant, compelling, and universal today as it was when it was first released on the 19th of March 2004. There is something about it that keeps us coming back over and over again. And maybe that's because it is stuffed full of tiny details that are only noticed with repeat viewings, but it goes deeper than that. See, despite its eclectic structure, its deliberately disorientating visuals, and its soft science fiction premise, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind is, at its core, a story that has been told in cinema countless times. Boy meets girl, boy and girl fall in love, but life gets in the way, so boy and girl break up, but come away from the experience as better people. But Eternal Sunshine flips this story and tells it to us not just in reverse order, but through the deeply subjective perspective of Joel, played by Jim Carrey, as he watches his memories of Kate Winslet's Clementine get erased, one by one, in front of his eyes. And this is happening because Joel employed the services of Lacuna Inc., a company that allows people to delete painful memories of people, pets, or experiences. He does this in a moment of anger after learning that Clementine, his ex-girlfriend, had done the same thing and deleted every memory she had of him.
And she looks at me like she doesn't even know who I am.
So Frodo, Bruce Banner, and Mary Jane Watson set to work erasing Joel's memories of Clem, starting with the most recent and working backwards through their relationship. But as they do so, Joel begins to realize that he has made a mistake and desperately tries to save these experiences by hiding them in other parts of his memory.
The eraser guys are coming here, so what if you take me somewhere else? Somewhere where I don't belong?
The premise is a bold one that could have only been written by the same person who would go on to write several other surreal, high-concept screenplays like Being John Malkovich and Synecdoche, New York, the person who Roger Ebert described as the most gifted screenwriter of the 2000s. But the credit does not sit with Charlie Kaufman alone. Eternal Sunshine actually began as a conversation between director Michel Gondry and the third credited writer, Pierre Bismuth, a French artist. According to Gondry, Pierre had the concept of sending a card to people mentioning that they had been erased from the memory of someone they thought they knew. He wanted to study their reaction as part of an art experiment, but he didn't end up doing it. I loved the idea so much that we started to write a story together based on the idea. Gondry took this idea to Kaufman, who he was working with at the time on what would go on to become Human Nature, the first feature film Gondry would direct. Together, they turned the idea into a pitch for studios, and according to Kaufman, it was so good that there was actually a bidding war. We put it out there, and within a few days, we had several good offers, all on a 5-minute pitch that I didn't expect much from. It was picked up in 1998 by producer Steve Golan, but it would take Kaufman several years to actually finish the script. And it was during this time that a little-known filmmaker called Christopher Nolan debuted a movie called Memento. And although they pitched their movie years before Memento came out, the script still wasn't written, and so Kaufman, understandably, panicked.
There was a moment when suddenly Memento, people started talking about this movie Memento, when I totally freaked out because I thought, oh, I can't do this anymore. And I called Michel and said, I'm not doing it. And we called Steve Golan and said, we're not doing it. And Steve Golan was very angry and said, you are doing it. And so we did it. But yeah, I mean, so I had I wasn't influenced by Memento. Except in that way.
And at first glance, you can see why Memento and its subjective storytelling, non-linear structure, and focus on memory as a core plot device would cause Kaufman some worry, but of course, that's about as far as the similarities go. Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind is a very different story from Memento in just about every way. I mean, for a start, it's not a thriller, it's a romance. It's a deeply human and strangely universal story. It just happens to use a concept that feels more at home in a movie like Total Recall, not a suburban contemporary breakup movie. But that's kind of the beauty of it. Eternal Sunshine makes a conscious effort to downplay the memory erasure technology. Kaufman and Gondry knew that this was just a way in which they could tell the story of Joel and Clem, and so they focus on that story. And in doing so, they tell us that we don't need to worry about all of this because the movie is not about a company that can erase people's memories. It's a movie about Joel and Clementine.
I think Michel and I were in agreement from the beginning that it should be the science fiction aspect of it should be really played down, would focus, I think, in my mind anyway, would focus the story on the relationship and that aspect of it rather than the sort of technological aspect of it.
We don't need or want a long-winded explanation of how it works or how it was invented or anything like that. Just like you don't need or want a long academic-y explanation of the word verisimilitude. We are told that this is a world in which some ramshackle backstreet business has technology that can erase your memory, and we happily accept it.
This is a hoax, right?
And I think it takes real confidence as a writer to take this approach of less is more when it comes to story elements like this, and to recognize that putting too much emphasis on this strange technology could risk turning it into a gimmick that distracts from the story you're trying to tell. But writing the story was only the first piece of the puzzle. The job now sat with Michel Gondry to bring it to life on film. But he was a good person for the job. Eternal Sunshine was only his second feature film, but Gondry was part of a wave of 90s directors coming into Hollywood from a background of music videos and advertisements. On the former, he was probably best known for his multiple collaborations with Bjork, while the latter, well, he basically invented bullet time 3 years before the Wachowskis. But particularly through the music videos he directed for Bjork, Gondry quickly established a highly distinctive style and an ability to express complex ideas with surprisingly simple but technically innovative visuals. He applied this approach to Eternal Sunshine, of course, but we'll come back to that, because Gondry knew that every good love story is anchored in its cast and the chemistry between the romantic leads. And who better to play the sullen, low-energy, depressed and vulnerable male lead than Jim Carrey? After catapulting to superstardom in 1994 with the triple hits of Dumb and Dumber, Ace Ventura, and The Mask, Jim Carrey was one of the biggest names in Hollywood. But this popularity was firmly attached to his outrageous comedic persona. Before Eternal Sunshine, he had only really had 2 attempts at more dramatic roles, The Truman Show and The Majestic. But even those roles had flashes of humor and eccentricity, and neither of them were anything like Joel in Eternal Sunshine. Michel Gondry admitted that he never even considered Carrey for the part. He only started thinking about it when Carrey approached him saying he was interested. But the more he thought about it, the more Gondry realized how good this could be. Now, I'm about to play the audio from an interview with Gondry, who not only has a ridiculously thick French accent, but he's also speaking over a crackly phone line 20 years ago. So yes, I have captioned it so you can understand what the hell he is saying about casting Jim Carrey.
The fact that he's so removed from what we saw, what I read on the paper, was challenging. I like the fact that he doesn't have the coolness of most of Hollywood actors. Was really interesting for me. I mean, all his energy that he needs to spend in most of his role, he had to keep it inside, and maybe that gave him some intensity.
I told you, but at least Gondry is very aware of what his accent sounds like.
Be nice to everyone, we have to get the good story out.
We do have to get the story out. I'll kind of translate as well, if that's okay.
Yeah, I like when you translate my English into English.
Anyway, like any good director, Gondry adapted his style to get the most out of his cast, particularly Jim Carrey. See, while the rest of the ensemble were encouraged to improvise their movements and dialogue, Carrey was told not to. Gondry felt that if he gave Carrey too much room for improvisation, then his natural instinct would lean towards comedy.
Don't call me Antoine. My name is Wally.
Yes, I know, but how can a woman love a man with a name like Wally?
My God, there's people coming out of your butt.
He said in another interview that Carrey was particularly annoyed when filming this scene. He's in the frame and he'd see Mark Ruffalo and Kirsten Dunst be crazy and improvising and going off script, and he got so frustrated. He said, "Why are they improvising? You told me the opposite." And I had to explain to him that it was different for his character. Gondry would also deliberately try to throw Carrey off and give him confusing or surprising directions right at the last minute.
And I tried to keep him off balance as much as I could. Sometimes we would roll the camera at the wrong time, and I would give the wrong order at the last minute just to create a little panic. I think by putting him off balance, that made him forget about what he should do to be the character, and he became the character.
But while Carrey has said that he found Gondry's unconventional approach frustrating, a feeling shared by his co-star Tom Wilkinson, there is no denying that it worked. Besides a tiny handful of moments where we glimpse the more familiar Jim Carrey, he otherwise absolutely disappears into this role. It's such a strong performance, and I think the quietness and subtlety of it works even more effectively because we know what Carrey is usually like. By casting him against type, it gives us a subconscious sense that Joel was once a happier, funnier, more energetic person, but the loss of Clem has been so devastating that this is all that's left. Of course, that didn't stop the studio advertising the movie as a wacky Jim Carrey comedy.
Any risk of brain damage?
It's on a par with a night of heavy drinking. Nothing you'll miss.
But speaking of casting against type, let's not forget about Kate Winslet. Like Carrey, she was very much at the peak of her fame at this point. Having come off the blockbuster success of Titanic, Winslet could have had any role she wanted in Hollywood, but chose to chase smaller, independent roles instead, working with prominent directors like Jane Campion and critically acclaimed older actors like Judi Dench and Jeffrey Rush. By 2001, she had 3 Oscar nominations, but they were mostly for historical dramas, so she began looking for something more contemporary.
When I read this script, I just thought it was so entirely different from everything I'd ever done, and because I'm so used to being seen in these kind of corset pieces and the English rose and da-da-da-da-da, and Clementine is just a foul-mouthed lunatic.
And what I find fascinating about Kate Winslet here is that she is playing 2 versions of her character in this movie. There's the real-life Clem, who Joel and Patrick interact with in the real world at various points in the story, and then there is the Clem who exists inside Joel's memories. A Clem whose best and worst qualities are exaggerated because we see her as Joel remembers her, not necessarily as she actually is. And it was all the more powerful for her to be playing such a high-energy character across from a sullen and depressed Jim Carrey.
Jim Carrey and I, for a start, paired together. It's a really unlikely pairing. You know, you would not imagine that he and I would end up doing something like this together. I'm playing the Jim Carrey part, and he's actually playing the sort of Kate Winslet part.
On the 10th anniversary of the movie, film critic Alison Herman wrote a fantastic piece on Flavor Wire about the character of Clem, and her association, or rather subversion, of the manic pixie dream girl trope. Now, that term wasn't coined until 3 years after Eternal Sunshine came out, but it has been retrospectively applied to Clem by some critics. The manic pixie dream girl trope is now more closely associated with Zooey Deschanel's characters in things like 500 Days of Summer, but it was first applied by critic Nathan Rabin to Kirsten Dunst's character in 2007's Elizabethtown. The manic pixie dream girl exists solely in the fevered imaginations of sensitive writer-directors to teach brooding, soulful young men to embrace life and its infinite mysteries and adventures. Clem, at first glance, appears to fit this trope exactly.
You know me, I'm impulsive.
But the story takes her character down a different path. We see the lowlights of her relationship with Joel. As Herman says, the audience learns that the booze she pours into her coffee isn't an endearing quirk, it's a sign of the drinking problem that led her to total Joel's car. She's mercurial, irresponsible, and resentful of Joel to the point of being outright nasty. Clementine's flaws aren't unforgivable, nor are they supposed to be. They're a reminder, even a demand, that we take her personhood as seriously as we would any characters with a less flighty personality or less colourful hair. Herman's piece, and the many others since, is such a good deconstruction of Clem's character the manic pixie dream girl trope itself, as well as the myriad other ways in which women in film are consistently reduced to tropes and labels. Damsel in distress, femme fatale, psycho ex-girlfriend, or more recently, Mary Sue. And let's be clear that male characters also fall into similarly reductive tropes. The buff action hero, the douchebag jock, the brooding lover, the gay best friend. And like any storytelling technique, a trope can be used well, or it can simply be the product of lazy writing. But using such labels to describe a character is almost always done as a way to avoid actually analysing the specifics of that character and what the story wants to say about them. And this is something that's done far more to female characters than to male ones, and it is more often than not done in bad faith. Bringing it back to Eternal Sunshine, Clem is an example of how this temptation by critics to ascribe labels like Manic Pixie Dream Girl to genuinely complex characters in film is to almost deliberately take nuance out of the equation when trying to understand a character. Anyway, as Herman points out, there is a moment in the film where Clem explicitly critiques this trope that, at the time, wasn't even a trope yet.
Too many guys think I'm a concept, or I complete them, or I'm gonna make them alive. I'm just a fucked up girl who's looking for my own peace of mind. Don't assign me yours.
To the extent the Manic Pixie Dream Girl character even exists at all, people have this tendency to use it as a criticism of the Dream Girl, even though the entire point is usually to highlight flaws in the male protagonist, who sees this girl as the solution to all of his problems, and so idolizes her and holds her to an impossible standard.
I still thought you were going to save my life, even after that.
He's supposed to learn that this is, hang on, let me just get this right. Oh yeah. Unhealthy behavior. Eternal Sunshine literally shows us how Joel remembers Clem, and how he sees her in his memory, and it also shows us how those memories are exaggerated distortions of reality. The entire story is telling us that people are complicated and imperfect, and our memories of them especially so. It is also consistently showing us the nuances and details of Clem's character, both versions of her, and so it's frustrating that some people feel comfortable including her on a listicle as an example of a trope that is designed to homogenize female characters in movies just because she has blue hair and swears.
Okay.
One of my favourite scenes with Clem is this one, in Joel's final memory, the one of their first meeting. As the memory collapses, Clem whispers in his ear, "Maybe in wonder." Joel awakes after the treatment, having completely forgotten Clem, but this subconscious instinct makes him go to the beach, where of course he is reunited with Clem, but now they're strangers. Yet she, like Joel, had a similar instinct to go to the beach on that day. It begs the question, what made Clem go there? Did Clem have the same experience as Joel? Did Joel, in her subconscious, also tell her to meet him in Montauk? They're questions that show how Clem is a character interesting enough that you could make this entire movie from her perspective instead. And it is also one of the questions that keeps audiences coming back to this movie over and over again. But putting the characters to one side, I think another part of the appeal of this movie is the simplicity of its aesthetic. Everything is grounded in a very mundane, suburban reality, including Joel's memories. There are surreal touches to them, even the occasional horror element, but these memories still have a kind of off-kilter sense of realism, because many of the more outlandish moments are still achieved in camera by filming on location and through techniques like forced perspective. Now, we've already talked about how Gondry brought the surreal style of his music videos to Eternal Sunshine, but another key creative lead on this project was the director of photography, Ellen Kuras.
Michel and I sat down and we started talking about ideas. You know, how do you make this person disappear? How can we do things with light and illusion? And I think we both realized that we were on the same page.
Kuras had a background in documentary filmmaking, which was a perfect match for Gondry's vision. His first movie had been a fairly structured and studio-bound project, and so for this he wanted to use locations and experiment with improvisation and spontaneity in a way that he hoped would lead to a more creative and distinctive final film. The characters often did not have marks or overly precise blocking, and so two camera operators would have to try and capture the action as best they could, with Gondry giving them directions through radio earpieces.
And so Michel could literally direct the actors before the shot, but also the camera whilst the shot was happening. So it gave the actors a lot of freedom because it meant that we could just do the scene differently every single time, which just meant that everything was very spontaneous and kind of fresh in every take.
Almost the entire story is told from Joel's perspective, and so the camera is handheld throughout to emphasize that subjectivity. And like everything else, this instability becomes even more pronounced when we're in his memories. Kuras came up with the idea of lighting a lot of the memory sequences with a single bulb attached to the camera, to give it a sort of tunnel vision effect that added to the surreal nature a lot of those scenes have. Where this effect was not being used, instead they would use other techniques to convey the unreality of it all, and with only a handful of exceptions, would try to preserve the authentic feeling by achieving their effects in the camera.
Michel wanted to make it very clear that we weren't locking things off on a tripod to do some of the in-camera effects.
Instead of using green screen, this scene was done just by holding up a blurred sheet of plastic to make the color and definition of the background fade, while this long take that features pretty much the entire cast was done with careful framing and the actors running back and forth behind the camera so that they could appear to be in two places at once.
I go back and forth 3 times to both positions in the scene, and you can even see when you watch the movie, it's not perfect. Just before the camera comes to me on the other side, I'm putting the hat back on, and I'm going...
It's simple stuff, but they're all techniques that required a lot of trial, error, and creativity to pull off effectively. And that's not to say there are no digital effects, but they are used very sparingly, mainly in this scene where Joel first tells Clem he is erasing her from his memory.
Look at it out here! It's all falling apart!
Now, you might have been focusing on the crashing car, but did you notice that Kate Winslet also only has one leg here? It's another detail to look out for next time you rewatch it. Even this scene, an extended one take where Joel goes back and forth down the same street, was achieved in camera with some creative editing and set dressing.
So what I did is, I leave the car and run this way, and after I ask him to run back to his car. And what we do is we flip the shot, and instead to run where Kate is, he's actually running back exactly where he was.
So there's 4 shots, and we had to create seamless transitions from one shot to the other and matching a human body. We used a couple of tricks to create the transitions, like a lamppost. We used some morph as well.
But while Joel is fighting for his memories across years and years of his life inside his head, the secondary story is taking place, pretty much all in a single night, as we follow the Lacuna team. A then relatively unknown Mark Ruffalo plays the technician overseeing Joel's memory erasure, along with his colleague Patrick, played by Elijah Wood in his first role after finishing The Lord of the Rings. Rounding out the cast is the original manic pixie dream girl Kirsten Dunst, and the late Tom Wilkinson, playing the head of Lacuna, Dr. Howard Mierzwiak. These scenes help anchor the increasingly bizarre memory sequences in reality, because containing all of this to a very specific time and place helps to give us a common frame of reference for what is real and what is taking place inside of Joel's mind. But Kaufman and Gondry go beyond this being a mere framing device. They give the secondary characters stories in their own right, the main one of which is Kirsten Dunst's character Mary, revealing she has a crush on Howard, which he initially tries to rebuff. But it is soon followed by the revelation that they have been here before, and that Mary had her memories of Howard erased.
We have a history. I'm sorry. You wanted the procedure.
It is a subplot that Kaufman uses to echo one of the central themes of Joel and Clem's stories. You can erase memories, but you can't erase feelings. And this idea that love is something deeper and more nebulous than simply words on a page or shared experiences is also reflected in Elijah Wood's character, who uses Joel's diaries as a way to seduce Clem. He says the same things to her that Joel did and takes her to the same places. But Clem knows that something is wrong, because even though her memories of Joel are gone, something inside her remembers not what was said in these moments, but how they made her feel. And ultimately, it's this that pushes her to breaking point, even if she still can't quite pinpoint what is wrong.
Funny and nice.
What?
Like the first time Joel and Clem meet, towards the end of the movie, she tells him not to joke about her name.
So, no jokes about my name.
Oh my darling, oh my darling, oh my darling, Clementine. Huckleberry Hound, that sort of thing.
It's a good meet cute and they begin hitting it off, and it's made even better because we have seen Joel's memory of this for real.
Oh my darling Clementine.
But the second time they meet, at the start of the movie, Clem tells him the same thing.
No jokes about my name.
For her, this is something she has had to tell people her whole life. But Joel, well, at this point in time, he has had his childhood memory of the song erased, and so he simply says,
I don't know any jokes about your name.
Huckleberry Hound.
I don't know what that means.
Oh, my darling, no, my darling, no, my darling, Clementine. No?
Sorry.
But the conversation goes a different way, and the two begin to fall in love for a second time. The movie is telling us that we are more than our words, and it is telling us that life is about the journey, not the destination. At the end of the movie, after finding out that they had each erased each other from their memory, Joel and Clem choose to start over again, despite knowing where it ended last time. They both know that even if the ending might be a painful one, there is still joy and life to be found along the way. They know how they made each other feel, and would rather relive both the highs and lows instead of just feeling nothing at all. It is better to have loved and lost than to have never loved at all. We forget that in the throes of grief, which is why people seek out lacuna or do the modern day equivalent of that. But this is what Eternal Sunshine tells us. Loss and grief is part of the bitter reality of human experience, and it's at its most painful when the love was strongest. Would any of us choose to give up those moments of joy, delight, and happiness just to spare ourselves the future pain of loss? I know what I think, and maybe you feel differently. But it is a question that gets to the very heart of the human condition, and it's an idea that has kept us coming back to this movie over and over again. It's the idea that makes this movie eternal.